Hi, Pastor David Tart here, and welcome to another Unlocking the Word, perhaps the first one for the year 2026. It's hard to believe we're saying 26 now. But anyway, as we get older, I always call it an attitude of accomplishment that we made it one more year, and God's been gracious to us through our whole lives and will continue to be. Well, today is still in the Christmas season for me. I don't know when you're watching this, so it's very Merry Christmas to you if you happen to be following along weekly with our Unlocking the Word podcast. And thank you again for watching. Well, today we're going to be looking at a question. I always like to begin my podcast with a question. And the question we have for today that I'm addressing is this. Okay, we've said all these wonderful things about Jesus the baby, come to be with us, born in us today, all these magnificent things about this birth of Jesus. But the question lingers, well, if Jesus was born and he lives in us today, well, what does that mean? I mean, where is Jesus? Where is this baby Jesus, the real one? You say he's alive? He rose from the dead? Well, just where is he then? And fortunately, today, I'll be looking at a text, John 1, which answers that question in a very beautiful and profound way. So, hear this little spiel about subscribing and logging on, subscribing and, becoming a follower of our podcast. And I will see you on the other side. Hi, welcome to our Toward the Dawn channel, and especially to Unlocking the Word. I'm so glad that you're listening or viewing this podcast. And I want to invite you to like it, share it, subscribe to it, not because we're looking for numbers, because that doesn't matter to us at Toward the Dawn, but we are looking for as a group of people who just absolutely love the Word and who love to dialogue about it. So be sure to comment your insights into the word for the day or to something I've said. Feel free to disagree or feel free to fill in the blanks of something you think I missed. And we will have a wonderful time working through these wonderful texts. And of course, we're going to keep our channel and our podcast safe. We're not going to allow for abusive language, hateful language. This is going to be a podcast that's all about respect and about coming together to embrace what God is speaking to us. So anyway, thank you for listening, and let's do the unlocking the word for today. Where is Jesus? That's always a great question. And believe it or not, we're not the first ones to ask that question. Gospel of John, which we have our reading today, was written at a time when that was a very, very talked about question. John, the Gospel, was written toward the end of the first century, around 100, maybe even as late as 110 AD. Scholars debate about it. But it was late Gospel. In other words, all the people who had been eyewitnesses of Jesus, who kept telling everybody that Jesus is alive. They saw him alive. They're passing around his stories. But it's way past the resurrection. This is like 40 or 50 years after which Jesus was said to have been raised from the dead. And all the first witnesses were gone. And so all they had were people who told them that they had heard that Jesus was alive, that he had risen from the dead. And so these Christians were struggling. This community was really struggling with that question. And they were trying to talk to other people about Jesus being alive and present. And yeah, I can just imagine the rejection they often got and maybe laughed at and so forth. And people were maybe trying to spiritualize Jesus and making him into some kind of mystical, supernatural power, and distant from real life, making Jesus and his teaching just another philosophical choice, amongst all the other choices that were going on in that time and day. Plus, the Romans had come, taken over the country, destroyed the temple. Judaism itself was in a faith crisis. God is real. Why did this happen? If Jesus is the Messiah, the Savior of in the lineage of David, why is our capital in ruins? I mean, you can just imagine the incredible doubt and maybe even disgust when it came to Jesus and his followers saying that Jesus is alive. And we should be able to get that question, because I think a lot of people today are still struggling with that. You say Jesus is alive. Well, where is he? I like to have lunch with him. I like to go to one of his concerts, so to speak. I'd like to see him if you say he is alive. And so John sits down, the writer of John. We're not really sure who the writer is, to tell you the truth. It's the gospel according to John, not exactly written by John. So there's a lot of debate about who wrote this gospel. Don't assume it was the apostle John. It couldn't be, really, because it was written 100 AD. The contemporary, the John the Apostle, is long since dead and gone, right? So, I mean, um, so who wrote John is a big debate, and I'm not going to bore you with all that. But we do know from reading John that they were dealing with this question of where is Jesus? And so the writer of John, we'll call him John, sits down and writes this gospel. And he begins his gospel with the first chapter, which is often called the prologue. In other words, this prologue, this first chapter of John, is really telling the readers, the hearers, what this gospel is all about. I mean, I always tell people whenever we read the Gospel of John, we need to have John chapter 1 in one hand, because the whole Gospel of John is all based on John 1. John 1, the prologue. And the beginning of the prologue is, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and so forth. I mean, it's definitely about the Word, which makes it, because I'm Lutheran, a Lutheran favorite, because that's what Lutherans absolutely salivate over is the Word. I mean, that's central to who we are and what we believe. I won't digress into all that. That's the Word. The Word that was in the beginning. Word that was there in creation, through whom everything is made. The ground and source of all of our being. The reason why the world exists, reason why you exist, is because of the Word, which all things were created. And in Genesis 1, God speaks the world into existence. God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. It's the Word. It's the Word that creates the world. But that really still, gets real philosophical and heady. So in John chapter 4, in verse 14 of John chapter 1, there's a switch in this absolutely beautiful and powerful, to me, it's like the central piece of John 1. And the Word, which everything was made, and which everything has its being, its very existence, became flesh and lived among us. And this us, is a key word in understanding how the word becomes flesh. This us is how we're able to answer the question, if Jesus is alive, where is he? Because for John, the writer of John, the word becomes flesh and lives among us. Who is the us? A lot of people will say, well, that's the contemporaries of Jesus. And the answer to that is, I don't see how that fits. The us in John 1:14 is a community that's hearing the story, that's listening to this story. It's John's community. It's our community. It's us. Whenever we hear lived among us, he's not talking about other people. He's talking about you and about me. Whoever is hearing this story, the word becomes flesh and lives among us, and we have seen his glory, full of grace and truth. Now, you're probably sitting there going, okay, Pastor Tart, what are you talking about? Word become flesh. See, that's what's so beautiful about the Gospel of John. Because he's going to spend the rest of this Gospel trying to explain to us, okay, full of grace, full of truth. How does that get fleshed out? And he starts using these incredible, wonderful stories. It's, the Gospel of John is a preacher's dream gospel because there's so many wonderful images that float around that we can use. He says because it's famous for what's called the I am statements. Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. I am the vine. I am the light." The I ams are all over this gospel. And why is that? Because John, here's the real main point of my unlocking the word, wants to say that Jesus is present in his word that lives among us as shepherd, as vine, as water, even as light. That is where we can see Jesus fleshed out in our lives, lives among us with the word that speaks of a God who's leading us and guiding us. A word that speaks of light whenever we're in the nighttime of our despair and struggle, and having faith that the word becomes in flesh when we live it out. It's not just a head game. It's not a head game. You want to see Jesus? Well, yeah, I'd like to see Jesus. Well, how is God shepherding you through a time in your life? Or better yet, how are you shepherding other people who are going through a deep, dark, struggling time in their lives? You want to see God? Yeah, I want to see Jesus fleshed out. Well, how are you seeing Jesus fleshed out and being a vine for you and you being a branch of that vine? In other words, how does the love of Christ get filled up in your life so that you can love others? How do you become a vine of life for other people around you? Through your encouragement, through your love, through your kindness. How are you staying connected through your faith in this grace and love of God that gives us life, like the roots deeply planted in a vine that produces fruits of joy and love and peace and hope in our lives? I mean, that is how the word becomes flesh. You want to know how Jesus' word becomes flesh? It becomes fleshed out in the community in which you live, in your family, in your friends, in your workplace, as you live out grace and truth with each other. And that is powerful. That's powerful. Because when God's word becomes fleshed out among us, we receive grace upon grace. It's no longer about trying to keep the rules and doing everything right and trying to live this pure and perfect life, but instead it's living out that grace and truth that we experience in Jesus Christ and receiving ourselves as sons of God, sons and daughters of God. And that becomes a very powerful thing. And Jesus makes known the heart of God that can live in our hearts, that can live in our families, that can live wherever we are. The Word made flesh and living among us is how we know and see Jesus. That's the Word made flesh. So that concludes my unlocking of the Word for this week. I look forward to sharing the next one. We're going to be going back into the Gospel of Matthew. Had a little fun side trip to John today. But I look forward to sharing the next Unlocking the Word with you. God bless and have a wonderful week.